Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the first webinar in the series that's focused on digitizing the worker's day. We're really glad you can join us live here right now, or perhaps you're watching this webinar recording. My name is Marika Vykamp. I'm going to be your moderator today. I head up client services and marketing at LibreStream. And I know some of you on the call here are new to LibreStream. What we do is we really focus on technology solutions for deskless workers. What we'd like to do is get right into the agenda here because we have it jam-packed. We just have 30 minutes to review some of the top market trends and technologies for these digital service workers. Just before we get into it, a couple of housekeeping items. You've likely noticed that your microphone is muted. That's just due to the number of registrants we had for today's webinar. We really do want to hear from you. So if you have a comment to share or a question to ask, please use the chat function. If you can't see the chat function, just click on the LibreStream Technologies box at the top of your screen, and you'll find chat is one of those options you can open. So we encourage you to do so. We are also recording today's webinar, and we'll send you a link to the recording at the end of the webinar. So our agenda, it covers an introduction to the deskless worker that we've mentioned, the trends we're seeing in this area, technologies that are opening up tremendous opportunities to improve service operations, and really we'll just have time to scratch the surface today. I've used that term deskless worker a couple of times, and you may have heard this term before. You might use it as part of your organization as well. These really are the people on your teams who are spending the majority of their time in the field. They could be at a customer location, on the manufacturing plant floor, on an oil rig, beside an aircraft in a hangar, wherever they may be. These people are just not behind a desk typically. These workers make up 80% of the global working population. Traditionally, though, they've been last to receive technology. That's changing, and companies are now investing in technologies that are helping this group of workers do their jobs more effectively and improve both the customer and the worker experience. And I'm sure many of you have seen that shift within your own operation. We've certainly seen it within our customer base. So why? Why this shift in an investment towards this group of the workforce? So we've tried to narrow down the why to the top 3 market trends. So it's my pleasure now to introduce you to Jeremy Pitts. Jeremy is the Chief Operating Officer at LibreStream. He spends the majority of his time with customers, industry analysts, and leading technology providers, really diving into the trends and technologies that can give value. So Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you, Marika. It's my pleasure to join everyone on this webinar today, and thank you all for attending. It was difficult to narrow down really the top 3 trends. Marika, as you said, the industry's really, there's rapid change going on. But really, we broke it down to what we consistently see in the field, and there was 3 things that kept coming up, which involve really customers, their demand for new business models, changing business models, workers, whether that's aging workforce that we've talked about for years, or new workers coming in, having to learn the skill sets and go through and work through the organization. And then ecosystem readiness. Is the ecosystem ready for all these technologies? Is it ready for the deskless workers? In the next few slides, I'll break each one down.
That might be relevant.
So we've all heard about and talked about these shifts in service, and really it's interesting. There's, whether it's outcome-based services, or it's power by the hour, there's lots of chatter in the industry. It doesn't matter the vertical, it doesn't matter what products you're servicing, it's really about customers are demanding new custom business models. I hear this over and over as I travel the world.
Sorry.
Many of these business models will really only work with technology. If you think about it, people want it quicker, better, and you have demands to have better service margins. It really isn't a matter of adding bodies at this point. If I think about some of the stories that customers share, really I'm convinced that the overall customer experience will really succeed or fail based on the information that your support team has at their fingertips. Information will become critical. Now really in your organization, there's lots of different challenges I know you face day to day. But this one keeps coming to the top as we talk to people. there's the one side that I mentioned earlier, the aging workforce. So workers are now having to make decisions. Do they leave the workforce? Do they leave that organization they've been at for 15, 25, 35 years? Do they stay past the retirement age that they thought they would retire at and really consult or help that organization as they're moving along in the future? And then there's this new workforce coming in that's filling in the bottom of the gap, and they're learning the ropes, so to speak. There's expectations on these new workers. They're thinking about, how do I use technology to do my job? When they look for a problem at home, they go to YouTube, they search that problem, they watch a video. That's very normal to understand how to fix these problems. They want this technology. So as I talk to people around the world, really it's interesting to hear that technologies like augmented reality can really help fill these gaps, both on these upcoming retirements. How do you retain the information? How do you capture what's in their head, capture all that knowledge that's happened over those years and years and years? And then on the other side of it, on the new workers coming in, how do you use that technology to attract that talent? I recently heard from a customer that they were at a recruiting fair and actually had the technology, the augmented reality technology up on the screen, and it was such an attractor. They were so thrilled with the response they had trying to bring these new workers in and explain to them that they are cutting edge, they are thinking of the future. I thought that was really interesting. So these new workers are really expecting digital tools. They're expecting to use these tools to help them do their job better. And organizations are expecting to use these technologies to ensure that they capture that data. This evolution of really the workforce is defining digital transformation. And the ecosystem, for years and years and years, this was always a question. How can my team get information at a customer site, at a job site, at a remote site? Well, I'm here to report the ecosystem is ready. Whether that's on an oil rig, whether that's in a remote field or a customer basement, there's lots of ways that organizations are figuring out how they connect, how they use this technology in spots they previously thought were unusable. So what's interesting now is typically I'm finding the field service workers, they have mobile devices in their pockets. So whether those are company owned, whether those are provided and reimbursed, I've seen a bunch of different models as far as that's concerned, but the devices are now there. And what's interesting about that is they're using these devices to look up things, to be more effective, and these networks are helping them. They're there and they're helping them connect. As I was putting this together, I thought of, in the last couple of weeks, I was invited by our partner Verizon to an executive meeting with a customer. And one of the things that really stuck in my head after that meeting as I thought about it was they were looking to refresh 3,500 smartphones in the field. And this is only 3 years after they'd already bought a brand new cutting edge, the latest, greatest smartphone. It really stuck with me that their management team understands the value of technology, understands the value of getting them that device. It's as if they're bringing a PC to enterprise for the first time. So it was really, really interesting to see that the value is there now. So the other thing we're seeing in trends, and Marika, I think you'll agree, is a momentum in wearables. So whereas people were dabbling and trying to figure out, we're now seeing organizations take entire groups of people, they'll take them off and they'll get them wearable devices. If they're in a very dangerous situation, if they're in areas where they really need their hands free, it obviously makes sense. Having that portable computer on their head, being able to use it, see everything, get that information, have it at their fingertips is critical. So I would say you put all those things together, the ecosystem is ready.
Well, that's great. And, Jeremy, thank you very much for those insights. And it is interesting to see how these kinds of technologies and trends are helping even in ways like recruitment and retention.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. I just wanted to, before we shift gears into the technology side, there was a question that just came up probably because you were speaking of wearables on HoloLens specifically. Are you seeing a fit for HoloLens in what you're looking at with customers?
I think that's a really good question because if you look in the news and you look at kind of press that comes out on enterprise organizations, you see a lot of HoloLens information. So I would say the answer is absolutely yes. Where we're seeing the trend emerge is a lot in training. So you're in the four walls, so to speak, or you're in the training facility, and you're using that to do things previously you couldn't do before, like look inside of a working engine that has real data from a trip that had happened. That just previously was unavailable without technology. So we think there's a really, really big use case for that. We're seeing organizations want to couple that with, how do I now take that to the field? How do I address safety issues, bandwidth issues, all those types of things? So yeah, there's a really great place for HoloLens and in technologies like that. Then how do you bring that to the field and how do you utilize that is really what organizations are looking at now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that will be the third webinar in this series where we're really going to dive in deep to the wearable revolution and talk about what we're seeing in the marketplace. So thank you, Jeremy. So we're going to shift gears now to the technologies that can play a role in the digital transformation of these service operations. We're not covering all of them, of course, because there are so many, but we will take you through augmented reality, the Internet of Things, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And some of these technologies are still in early stage development or pilot phases, but there are definitely others that have evolved to the stage where there are really proof points, already proven outcomes as a result of using these kinds of technologies. So Jeremy, if you could please take us through some of these technologies that you're hearing about the most.
Sure. I think how you introed that, Marika, is right. And as I'm traveling, talking to partners, talking to customers, at trade shows, those types of things, you definitely, you're starting to get to see people hone in. They're understanding where these technologies fit. I would say even 12 months ago, that was not the case. People were really still thinking about like that AR CAD model that's out in the sky, it's spun around, and a lower-end service technician could suddenly fix a problem that maybe they weren't qualified or hadn't fixed before because they have these 3D models. I think that is absolutely the direction everybody's moving. I think that's a long-term goal of what's happening. But when I recently attended a trade show and had the opportunity to not only spend the day with a lot of really interesting customers and partners and people in the industry, but got to do some keynotes and talk and some panels around this exact topic. And it really seems like people are honing in. And what they're saying, instead of that, a recent Forrester's analyst I was talking to said, which is called that augmented CAD 3D model, is the AR purist, they referred to it as. And I think that's true. I want to go to the extreme, the AR purist. But where most organizations are really focused, and I took away even from that convention I was telling you about a couple weeks ago, that organizations now are ready for immediate results. They want to solve these problems that we talked about a little earlier. They want to see applications, AR applications, that are going to give them immediate impacts and really fix things like first-time fix rates, improve them, make a big impact on their organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you mentioned Forrester. I was on a webinar, and some of you on the call here today may have been too, with an analyst from ABI Research, Erica Bruzzi. He was talking about some of the fastest growing AR applications, and it wasn't what you had termed AR purist kinds of applications, Jeremy. It was more the ability to have step-by-step guidance, remote expert, that these are the areas where people can actually get outcomes now. So it's similar in terms of what you were just sharing.
Yeah. So, I started thinking, this brings us back to the core. I mentioned it even on the last slide, which is really all these technologies have to be about value. So how do they add value? How will they add value? How are they adding value is the key component. And really, how do I get these tangible results? How do I bring this up the chain and explain these investments are making an impact? So I thought this was interesting. This is an Aberdeen report. The source is Aberdeen. And they're really saying top field service companies, 72% of them have visual collaboration. And I thought that was an interesting kind of little fact of people using technology to really drive those change. So I think IoT machine learning has probably been the biggest driver in the industry, or Industry 4.0, or all those types of things, depending on what organization you're from and how you talk about it. But really, IoT encompasses so many things, and there's lots of different use cases. Really, and what we always talk about and how we often describe IoT is really the connection between people, process, and assets. So you still are, the word people is heavily involved in that, and we think that's really important because once a machine breaks down, it doesn't matter about all the analytics. You have to get the people there. You have to be able to replace those consumables or whatever it is that needs to happen. You know, it's interesting, there's a report by Zebra that came out, and really it was about customer experience and safety. Those were the things that they found these machine learning / IoT initiatives were really important for them. And we see that too as we talk to customers. They're thinking about their IoT strategies. They're either partnering with some of the big organizations, they're creating or they're augmenting existing technologies out there to get the data that they need. And really it goes back to what I said earlier, which is you have to have the data at your technician's fingertips. That again is going to be critical to customer satisfaction, which again is really going to be that outcome-based, those new service models. So some examples of kind of IoT and using them in that AR world is maybe overlaying some data as you see here, so a technician's troubleshooting, and they can see the data that's happening as they're troubleshooting, and maybe even a remote support person can see what's happening. Those types of overlay sensor data, getting data to that technician is really critical again. And then really guiding a field technician to safely collect, like using work instructions, collect data that then augments the actual data from that machine. And you understand what the machine's doing, what that human data that got collected, you merge those two, and you really have a powerful story of exactly what's going on with that expensive asset. And really, Marika, a lot of the investment that's happening now as we look into it, we talk with analysts, a lot of that's going into the hardware side. So people are putting hardware equipment. That makes a lot of sense. It keeps it secure. It keeps it safe. But it seems like that's changing. And I was looking at a recent report by IDC, and they thought by 2021, really 55% of the spending would be towards that kind of software and services side. So I thought that was an interesting trend that we're seeing, where people are breaking out of the hardware now and moving to that services and software for their IoT needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is really interesting, and it kind of goes along very nicely with that investment that we're seeing in this deskless worker market.
Yeah, agreed. So on the predictive maintenance side, really there's lots of outcomes for IoT data, but really collecting that data, as I mentioned before, is really one piece of the equation. And it's what, as we all talk about, we've talked about it together in meetings, you guys talk about it, I'm sure, behind closed doors. What do you do with that data? How do you make it important to your business? And really identifying opportunities to get data. Like I said, get the machine data, but also get that human data from whether it's forms, whether it's augmented reality, understanding, merging those two can really have that impactful outcome that people are looking for with that IoT. And really, once you have that data, that brings us to how do we use artificial intelligence to understand, to break down what's happening. So whether it's like I was saying, data collected from IoT, from human sensors, like those field technicians capturing content, I was saying, Marika, from digital work instructions, something like that. As you're analyzing that data and bringing in that machine data, really pulling that together and feeding it into servers and having the ability to analyze that data in real time. So you're getting the human side, you're getting the machine side. And so what I find that's fascinating as we're out talking to customers, out at these shows, like I was saying, talking to partners, key partners, really there's things that can happen now that can really make a big impact on how field organizations are using artificial intelligence, using AR today. So instead of these big dream things 5-10 years down the road, there's lots of technologies out there that are making significant impacts today.
Excellent. Yes, I totally agree. And it is interesting that, most of these technologies on the AI side, for example, are maybe the ones that are more in pilots and people are considering, but you can get started now.
Yes, that's a good point.
So that's where we wanted to go next, is really to bring this together in terms of, as Jeremy's been talking about, AR, IoT, AI, all of these technologies work together, and most of the organizations we're working with are looking at the big picture and how all of these things feed into each other. Jeremy mentioned this concept of the human sensor. So data collection obviously is critical to all of this, because without good data, accurate data, complete data, it is hard to make inferences in terms of how to improve operations. And IoT machine data is certainly part of it, and that is definitely where we've seen the hardware investment, and we're going to start seeing that software and service investment Jeremy spoke about. But these human sensors, these individuals who are out there, they could be following digital work instruction and capturing the time it takes for each step, images of those assets, whatever it is that is required to perform that work, and have all that data available for analysis. Or it's the remote expert side. So any of these kinds of tools in that AR side we talked about as well, and on the IoT side, is really fundamental to get the data collected, and those are available now. If you think about data probably in your own operations, I would expect, there still is a lot of silo databases where content may be separated with the CRM, the ERP, field service management system. All of these separate data silos makes it really difficult. And so there is so much work now being done to really find ways to bring all this data together so that there are smart centralized content repositories. Certainly for LibreStream, those are some of the things that we're looking at with our own technologies in some of these areas to make sure that they can be connected and become part of that larger ecosystem. And then in terms of what you do with that data, so you've collected the data with AR technologies, IoT, you've got your data silo solution underway, and now in terms of data analytics. It doesn't have to go as far as artificial intelligence from day one. Certainly a lot of customers that we're working with, Jeremy, you probably would agree, are more starting on that data analytics dashboard side. Would you say that's true?
I would absolutely say that's true.
Yeah, with AI capability certainly underway. And that's become so important because from that data, so many important changes can be made. And we think about it in terms of the top two assets within typical service operations, being the people and being the products. And so, you know, from a people perspective, with all that kind of data that's been captured, being able to schedule smarter. So perhaps you don't send the person closest to the problem, you send the one with the best qualifications, and that's recommended to you. Or perhaps that worker is out in the field and they're guided with automated visuals that come up to help them along the way, or work instructions to take them through it. And then, of course, products. And Jeremy, you touched on some of the predictive maintenance or proactive customer support based on the data that's coming in. So these are all very important areas, and it's been a pretty exciting, I think, time for these customers as they figure out where to put their focus. So we wanted to take a few more questions. We asked the one that had come up in terms of the market trends. There are quite a number here in the chat room, so I'm just going to ask you, Jeremy. One of the questions here, which I think is a really good one, is around deployment. These technologies often require change in the workforce or in the customer, how customers are approached. What do you see as the hardest part of deployment?
Yeah, I think that is kind of the heart of the question, right? There's the technology and the people, and how do you merge those two and get it to work? So I think that's a great question. So what we see, I can speak a little bit to what I hear, but definitely what we see. So we've actually put a dedicated team in place that does the training, deployment, and the adoption. And we did that about 2.5 years ago. And the difference we've seen with customers helping them do this, because you'd be surprised, Marika, and I know, well, I guess you wouldn't, because you've heard this enough times around the halls and with customers, but customers don't have, they'll get the budget for a project manager, they'll get the budget for this project and the technology, but they don't have the people to think about how do they really adopt this technology. You're not spending a bunch of money on consultants. So having that ability, augmenting that ability, and thinking about that during the deployment is absolutely critical. There's some really terrific ways, we won't have time to talk about it, but maybe we can incorporate into some other webinars, is what you incorporate, how you roll it out, but then how do you track, how do you monitor, and the reporting on the back end for that rollout all become really critical for you to understand how it's working, how you're leveraging the technology and the areas for growth.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and certainly starts touching on some of those data analytics just specific to the success of the deployment. Yeah, interesting. One of the other questions, there's quite a number on the wearable front, but I think we've answered a couple there, and I thought I'd ask this one instead. This question is related to the AR side and video, and the question is, when do you think this kind of technology is just something that's going to be a given within service operations, that is just going to be expected?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people trying to predict that, and I think the answer realistically given is 5 to 10 years, and it's more on the 10 years than 5. And I say that not that the companies that are in this space now and are not going to be successful. That's not what I'm saying at all. But when you think about a given, that's like a PC at every desk or a telephone at the desk and those types of things, which at least in the past were a given. And so what I think is going to happen is organizations, like we talked about in the webinar, as they're using technologies to move in that direction, you're going to see a lot of things come together. As you saw with Android phones, of course, there's lots of different phones and software for Android. So how does all that fit together? And you're starting to see that ecosystem getting easier and easier and easier. That's what you're going to see here in augmented reality, where there's lots of things like, how do I create those files? Because I'm creating CAD files today in 3D. How do I make those available? How do I make them get to the end technicians at the right time, perfectly in the exact way that they need it? Those kind of steps are being figured out now. And I think it's going to take some time, as it's taken with other technologies, internet browsers, those types of things that are now completely ubiquitous. So I think 5 to 10 years, but we're moving quick in the right direction.
Yeah, it's interesting. And certainly I would imagine you'd have similar response to mixed reality, virtual reality kind of applications.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing some amazing things. You look in the news, you look at guys like Microsoft who are launching their next generation, which they put a tremendous amount of effort in. I think you're going to see those things move quickly and move in the right direction. The question is, how does it work every single time? Because you're in the field, you're fixing, customer satisfaction. We talked about that being critical to the success of all these business models our customers are asking for. How do you make it work every time? How do you make that field person comfortable, get the information they want? And when you think about the things that have to be overcome, I think we're in the right direction, and I think things are moving at a pace I've never seen before. It's really exciting.
I agree, and certainly for these deskless workers, they are in these tough environments.
Yeah.
It does have to work. Well, I think that's all the time we have here for questions. I just wanted to bring your attention, if you haven't already, there are 2 more webinars that are a part of this series on Digitizing the Worker's Day. The next one will be next week, which is talking about the shift that we're seeing to paperless work instructions. We'll take you through some of the, why we're seeing this happening, give you a demonstration of what this could look like on the smartphones, tablets, and wearables of your workers out there. So that's the next one. And then the part 3 of this webinar is this wearable revolution. And I'm sure everyone here on the line has at least pilots underway to some degree using wearables. So we'll share a lot of really good information in terms of the wearables and the different applications that we're seeing across our customer base. So I encourage you, please sign up for those webinars. We will send you this recording and definitely be answering any of the questions we didn't have an opportunity to get to. So thank you everyone for your participation. It's really nice when you get an engaged audience, so it is very much appreciated by Jeremy and myself. So if you have follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to you. We will send you that email with the webinar recording. So goodbye for now, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.